Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson, the author of the biography of Verne Gagne. The book is called Verne Inside and Outside the Ropes. Now, some of you may not know or remember who Verne Gagne is. Verne Gagne is or one of the best professional wrestlers ever enter squared circle. Verne Gagne was the first four-time Big Nine, now known as Big Ten, wrestling champion in a row in different weight classes. That's two things he's done. He was an Olympic alternate for the 1948 U.S. Olympic wrestling team. He played both football, the Green Bay Packers briefly, and the Chicago Bears. He was a Golden Gopher. He, in the 1950s, went into professional wrestling and made wrestling really, he was a pioneer of what it is today. Now, this book also just does not cover his professional life. It covers his personal life, his family, his heritage, the kids when they were growing up, Greg, Kathy, and Donna. Also, it goes into some other things that are personal, how the AWA kind of went under later on in his later years in life. So, folks, as Marty O'Neill used to say, run, don't walk to your computer or bookstore and order this book today. It's on Amazon, Kobo, Rakuten, Barnes & Noble, and Lulu Press. Everyone, thank you and take care.
Welcome to another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. Today, folks, we got a very special treat for you. We're going to be talking about a man that is a legend in this business and is a true professional. And we're also going to be talking about the WFIA. I'm going to bring in first my tag team partner, the man behind the scenes, if you will, Mr. George Schire. There he is, my friend. How you doing, George?
I'm doing it. I'm styling and profiling.
Yeah. I'm glad to have you back on. Thanks for coming back on. And our special guest today is, there he is, Mr. Les Thatcher. Les, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, it's good to be with you guys. And of course, I've been hanging out with George off and on for years. So is there any beer, George?
We drank it all. We're going to talk, as you said, Brian, we're going to talk about, really, we're going to put Les over. I'm going to start by saying this. I have been around pro wrestling since 1959. And I have literally, over the decades, and I'm not talking the modern day stuff now because I don't follow it closely, but in our era, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, into the 80s, early 90s, for me, I saw them all with my travels in different territories. And, there was an old adage out there that because someone didn't hold a title all the time or they whatever, they weren't a legend or they weren't great. And then you had guys like Les Thatcher, who this falls into. This guy's a legend. I'm telling you. And Les Thatcher in this business, has done everything, whether it be wrestling, announcing, promoting, training. He is the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, as the superstar would say. So
what do I owe for this introduction?
No. It's just, it's funny because sometimes just because the names aren't as recognizable as the superstars and the Jerry Lawlers and the Larry Hennigs and the Crushers and so on and so forth, some of these guys, and Les is among them, they get lost in the shuffle, and it bothers me a lot because when you're talking halls of fames, Les should be there, period. You just got to talk to the right people that know that he is there. Yeah. And to
now,
have
you mentioned that I've done everything. And one thing I haven't done, George, haven't got rich.
Well,
and I think it's probably too late in life to start now. So.
The thing is, all the things that I've done for wrestling and around wrestling over the decades, Les, I've done so much of it where I've either gotten paid so little or nothing. and I enjoy doing it because it's just in my blood. I enjoy putting guys over and giving them the spotlight that they so richly deserve.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about the WFIA today, when we get to that, I think the fans that are watching are going to get to see really how the business was and what made it evolve to today. But we'll see a different business that for guys like me, and I'm 73 years old. I'll let everybody know that up front. So from the age 8 of in 1959, I've pretty much seen it all.
Yeah.
I got you by 11 years, you know.
I told you were an old man when you came on. but I'm working to catch you, buddy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your career. So you started, I believe you were Rookie of the Year in 1967. Is that correct with the NWA?
That's correct. Yeah, I broke into business. My first match was July the 4th, 1960. And that's, yeah.
But then you worked your way, got into, where did you start out at when you had your first match?
Well, I was trained by the first ever, I guess, pro wrestling school that was open to the public. Realized it was a closed shop back then. I mean, I wanted to be a wrestler when I was 9 years old, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Eddie Rogers was my childhood idol. I could strut when I was 10. I wanted my mother to bleach my hair blonde, and she refused. Of course, looking back, I'm glad she did, because I'd been in a fight in the schoolyard every day if she had done that back in those days, right? But yeah, well, Santos, I was looking for a door to get in the business, you know, and it was frustrating. Everybody, well, you got to get bigger. You got to learn. Okay, where do I learn? Well, nobody had the answer for that. And then in a Wrestling Review magazine, there was an article about this guy in Boston, Tony Santos, a promoter, who would train young athletes, hopefuls, wanting to be a professional wrestler. So I sent him a letter. You know, back then there was no emails or thing like that. So anyway, I sent him a letter, and he sent me back a few weeks later a trifold, which I still have in my memorabilia somewhere. So anyway, it was $300 for 6 months. And so I got on a Greyhound bus in February 1960, went to Boston, Massachusetts. And 6 months later, I had my first match in Blue Hills, Maine, at a 4th of July celebration. And a lot of young kids, you know, I said, you know, when I went in, these kids today come in the door knowing it's predetermined. They call it a show. You know, well, I can be an actor. I walked in the door in Boston almost 65. Well, it has been 65 years ago, thinking it was a shoot. When did they smarten you up? I said, July the 4th, 1960. Not until the day. Seriously, yeah.
I have heard from other people we've had on the show that back then they didn't tell you nothing. You just learned the fundamentals. You didn't learn anything else about the business, and as you went on in the business, if you went on in the business, that's how you learn.
Well, that morning, Tony, I lived in a rooming house just across the street from the gym. And one of his sons came over and said, Dad wants to see you. Well, it's 4th of July. I knew we weren't training. I thought, oh, am I in trouble? I'm getting called on the carpet for something here. Or at least that's what I was afraid of. So I went in, you know, and he said, now, you've got your boots and you've got a jacket and you got your trunks and all. And I said, yes, sir. Well, today is your day. Go home and pack your gear and come back and we'll talk about it. So when I came back, the way they taught us to work then, without telling us it was a work, was he'd say, okay, you two guys get in the ring. We want to be sure you got all the mechanics down right. So I want you to go work through a match, right? But since there's not going to be a winner or a loser, nobody's getting paid. I just want you to put the holes on, but apply no pressure.
Yeah.
That's how they were teaching us to work, right? So that was So anyway, but when he said, well, that's what they're going to do today. Now, he didn't say for the rest of your life in the business, this is what it's going to be, but they're going to help you out today to break the ice, right? So I knew then after that, I'm on my own, right? But anyway, that's how I broke in. And I wrestled twice. It was just 4 of us on the card. Because back then, George can tell you, back then, spot shows, it wasn't uncommon. 2 single matches and a tag, and we put in 2.5 hours. When you tell today that 4 guys put in 2.5 hours, they look at you like you must be nuts, right?
Yeah, right.
But, a lot of my education was between Boston, Massachusetts, and Blue Hills, Maine, in the car with Ronnie Hill, I had my first match with, Cowboy Ronnie Hill, Bo Montana, who was one of the nastiest looking heels. I had bought tickets to see, in Cincinnati when I was a kid. And the third guy was Joe Sasso, Red Sasso, who played football at Boston College. He was a local boy who looked like a heavier Pat O'Connor in a way. But anyway, the 3 of them, educated me too. And of course, then on the way home, I got more education. So, and that's the way it started.
It's funny when you say about you weren't smartened up or anything until the very day. And I remember one time years ago talking to Ole Anderson, and Ole said he never got smart. He went through Verne's camp, Verne Gagne, and he said he never got smartened up until the night of the match. And Verne said, "You're going over tonight." And that's when Ole's, they had the conversation that you're gonna win this match, and it was like, what?
Well, they probably didn't know what going over meant.
Well, and that's probably true. It was a different thing. But and I want to just touch on those spot shows too, because through the decades, we've always had the arena cards, auditoriums, it's the big ones. But some of those spot shows, I'll tell you what, you had some of the best matches from guys who were working small gymnasiums or local National Guard armories, wherever it was. And you might have only 200-300 people, sometimes less, who knows? Sometimes less. Did you catch that little pun there?
I got it.
No,
that's why you're not doing stand up for a living.
No pun intended. I'd make no money at that either. But the matches, they'd have, like you said, they could have 4 guys on the card. They'd put 2 guys against each other. They'd build heat, build a reason, and a little to get into that tag team match to get the revenge. And it worked, man. It was great. Good stuff.
Yeah. It was, it was the kids. There's several, I think, minor problems about learning and getting good mileage in the ring today is that there aren't any house shows on the big companies.
Nope.
And that's where when you weren't on TV, that's where you got your education, right? Because then that veteran you're going to go 20 minutes or 25 minutes. It's not going to be a 6-minute match or whatever, right? The kids don't have that opportunity now. Everything, mostly TV, right? So they like in NXT, they have shows that they're taped for their review, but they're not, put out on public television or anything. But that's something that they've done away with, and it's a shame because that was part of the learning process of being able to work with it. And when you're working with a different veteran every night, it's hard not to learn. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I've always told fans that with the territorial system as it was back in the day when we had 25, 30 territories. I said it was so unique that wrestlers could go from territory to territory. And if you didn't learn or not learn from people, I mean, you could learn what not to do that wouldn't fit into your repertoire.
Oh, yes.
You could learn so much. And I know a lot of the trainers, they would put the guys in the business and they would send them on the road, Verne Gagne being one of them. He'd send the guys out and say, get out there. You're going to Florida. You're going to the Carolinas. You're going down to the Funks in Amarillo, and you're going to work with guys. And this is where you pick up your style, your ring
Yeah.
technique, your
Well,
gimmick.
when Ole first came into the Carolinas, that was the first chance I had to work with him there. And who else from up there?
Well, you got a sign right behind you, a poster right
Yeah.
behind you, the Anderson brothers and Thatcher and Kirby. And the Andersons, I'm guessing at that time, was Gene and Lars, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell you an odd story about that. Again, the story that I tell kids today, because the thing, if anything bothers me really, it's just paint by numbers. We're going to lay out the whole match in the back.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know anybody out there in the front. We don't know what they're going to buy or what they're going to like, but we're going to do our match here in the back, and then we're going to walk through it, that sort of thing. But I tell when I do training camps and stuff, I tell this story. First time I was ever in Atlanta. The first night was the old auditorium in downtown Atlanta on Friday night. So the booker was Leo Garibaldi, who I'd watched wrestle with. He and his dad, were a tag team on Hollywood Legion Stadium wrestling. But anyway, Leo was an amazing booker. But that night, he came in the dressing room and he said to Kirby and I, he said, "I need you guys to get your opponents over tonight." And he said to me, he said, "Now I don't want you to think I'm going to beat you right off the bat because you're your first night in the territory, but these guys are going to be my top heels for a long time, and I need to start getting them over." Okay, fine, that's business. So I had never met the guys, and of course back then you weren't in the same dressing room, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if Kirby, he was already in the Tampa, in the Atlanta territory when I went in. So he may have worked with him before, I don't know. So anyway, we go out there and Leo is the referee. Leo refereed several of the matches on the cards that he, when he was in the building. So anyway, he's our referee. And it's one of those, it was one of those nights you couldn't have made a mistake if you wanted to. I mean, we had that old auditorium rocking and the people were popping. And in the middle of the match, Leo comes around and said, "We're not going to waste this. We're bringing it back. Here's a new finish." In the middle of the match.
Wow.
And we went in, we did it. It was just, because, we worked in, it was improv for us anyway, with the exception of finishes, right?
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
So when I lay that out to kids, they said, "How'd you do that?"
Yeah.
We just did it. It wasn't, we didn't have to stop. I make a joke out of it. I tell some of these kids, I said, you lay it all out back there. And here's the problem. If your opponent's supposed to go to the top rope for a big, elaborate finish, and 10 minutes into that 20-minute match, he pulls a hamstring. Not bad enough that he can't finish the match, but he's not going to the top and do anything.
Sure.
Right.
You've got to come up with a new finish. What do you do? Say, "Excuse us, ladies and gentlemen, we need 35 minutes to go back to the back and redo this match all over again." You can't do that. And that's anybody that came out of HWA, which was my school,
Right.
knew how to call a match in the fly. And I told, if they're paying you to lay it all out in the back, it's a business. Do what you're paid to do. But human beings make mistakes. And if you blow something out there and can't get back, you got to know how to pick it up and go from there.
Right.
And you see that, you must see that. Now it's like, "Oh, what happened? We blew a spot," and they get lost, and it's a shame. But yeah, that's but that I tell that story about that tag match. They look at me like I got two heads. How'd you do it? We just did it. That's all.
Yeah.
I know Red Bastine told me one time, he said, this is coming from him now. He said, we would most often get a finish to the match. And then it's up to us, whether it be two opponents or a tag team, to go out there and make it happen until we're going to go to that finish. And then we'd have it happen. And that way, impromptu, which I guess I would have always thought that would have been better. Impromptu working towards the finish. you're going to get a better match than if you're trying to remember every time you're supposed to do a somersault or lay on the mat or wait a minute, it's the 10-minute mark. I'm supposed to be here and I'm supposed to be there. And that would be crazy stuff.
You know what? I couldn't shoot me, because there's no way I can lay out a 15-minute match step for step and do it. Well, I'm going to tell a story here, but I'm not going to throw either guy to mention who told me the story or who it's about. But it was two guys. You would know both names immediately if I did. But the one guy is telling me he's a big pay-per-view, and his opponent comes up to him and hands him three sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper, and he looks at it. He said, "What's this?" And his opponent says, "That's our match."
Oh,
and he handed it right back. He said, "You call it, because there's no way I'm going to remember all this."
Yeah.
So I said to this particular guy, and what happened? He said, "Oh, we got a few minutes in and he forgot." So I took over and called it on the fly, and we had a match.
Yeah. The words that I always remember when they used to sell the programs at all of the matches at the arenas, the 4-page pamphlet program type thing. I always loved the words on the lineup page that said program subject to change. And I learned early on, Les, that wasn't just about the meaning that some of the participants may or may not appear for whatever reason, or the card had to be changed as far as who's going against who, probably on the fly. But right. I always took it as the program is subject to change, because when these guys are working, they've got to impromptu certain things that are going to make it, not the way. But that was a little behind the scenes thought in my mind.
But that's the thing too. Working in a different town every night, you and I could have a match in Knoxville tonight that blows the roof off the place. Take that same match 175 miles down the road to Nashville, and the people sit on their hands the next night. So you better be able to change things up. You got to feel the people,
Yeah.
So,
go ahead, George.
Well, I was just going to say, when you say that, so you're in this business now for a while, and we were looking at that poster behind you, and you're working with two guys like Gene and Lars Anderson, and of course you got Roger Kirby, who, another guy, I'm telling you, deserves far, far, far more credit than he will ever get.
Yes.
Because, he wasn't the original Nature Boy, and he wasn't this, but he was so damn good.
When we were always baby faces when we were partners.
Yes.
A lot of people never saw Curb as a baby face either.
I think I only saw him as a heel all the time, and I thought he was good.
Yeah.
But, the thing about these guys is when you are in that ring every single night, and back in those days, you didn't just work Saturdays. You didn't just work once a week, like you mentioned, in the car. Good Lord. You're in the car for 300 miles to get to the next podunk town somewhere. And it's every day. And that's where you learned a lot. I know most of the guys have told me over the years, all the conversations we had in the car, all of the learning that we did in the car.
Yeah. One of the things that I told the kids that came to my school, I said, we train 4 days a week. Right. Sunday was mandatory. We started at noon on Sunday. Time to go to church and then come and let me yell at you and kick your ass. But anyway, we trained we had 4 organized training sessions. You will appear at least 3 of those, or you will be here until I die, because you won't have that. And why? I said, well, you know what? There were a lot of very talented workers, not acrobats, not theatrical performers, workers. And I learned from them. And the thing of it is, you need to know how to change things up on the fly, because things don't always work out the way you expect them to. Plus, you don't know those people out there.
Yeah.
That's I use, again, I have a sarcastic sense of humor, which George can probably tell you I do. But I'll ask at a seminar, I'll say, okay, how many guys here are married or have a living girlfriend? Raise your hand. Okay. I've got homework for you tonight. Okay. When you get home, you guys are ready to go to bed. Say, honey, we're going to make love tonight. And when I start kissing your neck, then you start stroking, and they start looking at me like George is looking. You're looking at me now too, and Brian and thinking, what the hell are you talking about? And I said, it's all right to laugh. I meant it to be sarcastically funny, but I'm making a point here. This woman, you live with this woman. You know what she likes. You know what she doesn't like. And yet you wouldn't do what I just told you, because probably she'd kick your ass out of the bedroom anyway. But the point is, my point is this, but you're going to go to a town Saturday night and you're going to sit in the back for an hour and talk to the guy, and you're going to work 15 minutes of that. But it's going to take you an hour to lay out a match for people that you've never seen before in your life, and you already know intimately what they want. How can that be?
Right.
Yeah. Good point. I want to ask you something, or I want to change the subject just to here because you were talking about traveling in cars. And I'm reading here that you were a drag racer
Yes.
Yeah.
for a lot of years here and won quite a few races. Talk a little bit about that. A little something different about Les Thatcher in this NHRA
Well,
drag race.
the crazy thing, Brian, is that in terms of a career, if wrestling hadn't worked out, that was the other career that I fell in love with, drag racing as well. Those two things and bodybuilding have been a constant for me
Yeah.
for most of my adult life. Well, even before my adult life, I drove my first on my drag strip the first time at age 15. Before I had a driver's license to drive on the street, I was driving race cars, right? And yeah, and we won. We were some regional meets and stuff, and we're trying to get more deeper into it. We ran at the. I was involved. We were involved in the National Hot Rod Association, which would be like the NWA of wrestling, right? But it's still the master plan for drag racing today. And I raced at the Nationals, the NHRA Nationals in Indianapolis Raceway Park, 2 different times. But the point was, you got to get money to get those cars sponsored and to keep them running, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it came down. Well, I still raced after I broke into business and got my feet wet. I tried to be, until I was 26. I would try to be a wrestle around Cincinnati or in the territories there, right? From the spring to late summer, because I get wherever I was at, get home in spring. Dad and I get the race cars ready and race through the summer. But I'd wrestle too. I know there were nights like, if I were wrestling for the Indianapolis office, I might be in Terre Haute on Saturday night. And by the time I get back to Cincinnati, it's 2:00 or so in the morning.
Yeah.
Then by the time they get me up Sunday to go to the racetrack, Dad's already got the race car hooked up and ready to go. I crawl up in the back seat of the race car and sleep another hour or so till we get to the drag strip. And then I get up. It was a family affair. My dad, my mom and dad were products of the Great Depression, right? My dad had quit school in the 9th grade to help support his family. And he was managing an auto repair shop by the time he was 16 years old. So he was a hell of a mechanic. And my mom loved racing. And she would fix lunch for us. And they'd bring one of these folding lawn chairs, right? Mom would take that lawn chair about halfway down the track in the pit area where we were based, sit it near a speaker, and she would keep the times of the cars that I was running against, so that when intermission, when it came time before the actual races, you sit down and see who we're up against, and so it was a family affair, and I loved it. So, but then, like I say, it came down to the point I had to make a decision: either take this fork or that fork, and we couldn't get enough money up. And plus, wrestling was just starting to take off for me too. So
Yeah.
Kirby and I talked. We never approached it. We were talking about if we could get the NWA to sponsor a drag car.
Oh yeah.
And then take it around to the different territories.
Yeah.
And the drag strips, that were like in the cities that, well, like Indianapolis, if you're wrestling for Barnett or Bruiser, you're in Indianapolis Raceway Park, right? Johnny Doyle in Detroit, you go to Detroit Dragway. But you could advertise wrestling at the drag strip and the drag strip at the wrestling matches, right? So, yeah, wow. But it never, but yeah, I still, listen, Brian, I still watch it on television. My hands get sweaty. There's nothing like when you feel that car under you, and once that light hits green, man, and you hit that gas, it's a rush.
I bet it is. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Go ahead, George. Steamboat. Well, he's still drag race. He's got a Mustang now. He's still racing.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Back then he had a 396 Chevelle. Tim Woods had a 442 Olds. That was their drag strip car came talk at the time. Johnny Weaver and Johnny Walker both raced stock cars, round. So yeah, a lot of the guys raced.
Wow, that's pretty neat. All right, George.
Well, I was going to say, so you mentioned Kirby a few times, and I think we want to remind folks that you and Roger, and you had another partner, Dennis Hall.
Right.
And I know off and on you worked as the wrestling cousins.
Right.
Did you often try to get booked together in territories, or did it happen that you could go together, or were you individual?
It started, well, Dennis and Roger are both from Indiana, right?
Right.
So both we met working for for Barnett initially.
Barnett at the time.
Yeah, and then the Bruiser. And actually, when the Bruiser and the Sheik were in competition, since we were local guys, we could work for both offices because we were just getting guys over anyway, right? With occasionally getting your hand raised. But so I mentioned I had been in Arizona, been in Phoenix in 66. Came home looking for, when I came home, I could always work for whatever promotion was around home. So to keep busy. But then I was looking for some place to go, and Kirby and Hall were in Atlanta. And so they called me from Leo's office, from Garibaldi's office. And they said, Roger said, I'm going to put Leo on the line. He wants to talk to you. So he said, they tell me you can work, can you? I said, well, I hope so. He said, would you like to come into Atlanta? And I said, yes, I would. So, okay. He gave me a starting date. So Dennis was going to Florida. And so since Roger and I were friends to begin with, we just came, and Leo said, well, I'm going to put you guys together. I thought, okay, well, we came up with the idea for the cousin thing. And Dennis, when he found out that I was in Atlanta, he drove up with a couple of days off from Tampa to hang out with us. In fact, there's a picture floating around of the three of us having lunch at a Kmart. Kmart had a restaurant probably before either one of you.
I have that.
Old man, but he would.
I have that.
Yeah. But and we just talked, and so we decided to do that. So Roger and Leo loaned us out to Rocky McGuire in the Mobile territory. We went down to work Dothan and Mobile. So they came to us and said, we need a babyface team in Louisiana to work with the Daltons. That was Donnie Fargo and Frank Dalton. And he said, would you guys be interested? I said, well, if you can clear it with Leo. So they cleared it with Leo. We went in, Kirby and I went in, and Hall came in after the Christmas break as the third cousin. The deal was we were supposed to start working six-mans. There was a third Dalton, which was Johnny Long from Chattanooga, Tennessee, but he was wrestling as Bob Dalton. Now, for some reason, he left the territory before we got to the six-man. So anyway, they put Bull Ramos in the spot that would have been Bob Dalton's. And we worked. they we worked with Frank and Jack or Donnie.
Don Fargo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, I don't know how many hour draws we had and tag matches. Donnie was one of the greatest heels I have ever been in the
Absolutely.
ring with. I'll tell you a funny story about the fan base at that time. We were in Baton Rouge, and we were going through 60 minutes, and so when they need a timekeeper today, it makes it more interesting, I think. But anyway, you get down to that 5 minutes, and then start counting you down, right? And so, they set it up so we'd split falls, and so we're going through time. And so Kirby and I are making a big comeback, and the bell rang. The timekeeper had cut off about a minute and a half. I don't know exactly, but close to maybe. The problem was the fans were keeping time.
Oh, yeah.
So there was more heat on the timekeeper than there were on the Daltons, because they thought the Daltons had him in their pocket. So anyway, getting him out of the ring, getting him away from ringside was tougher than getting the Daltons out of there. But we had to come back the next week. We came back with 2 timekeepers, and they made fans a timekeeper and a 90-minute time limit.
Okay.
So but yeah, but with Kirby and Hall, we traveled together, and we shared apartments, shared car. I mean, it was just, I miss those guys.
Well, they also wrestled, I think, as they were Dennis and Roger Dolly. The Dolly.
Yeah, that was for Bruiser, a short
period.
That was
with Bruiser. Yeah. And then I wanted to say, you mentioned Johnny Long. I think that was the same John Long that was Harley Race's first partner, wasn't it?
I believe
Harley was Jack Long.
Yeah.
When he started in the business. And of course, we could go into Harley Race because you worked with him.
Most number of times.
You and Harley, I was 22 and he was 19.
Yeah.
I was Kansas City in 63. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys put on quite the training camp. Harley and Steamboat.
Oh, yeah. Harley and Steamboat and I did. Harley did those week-long camp tryouts for Noah at his place too. But how we first worked together is first time I went to CAC, I suggested to Red and them, why don't you do a training camp out here? Because that night, I don't know, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I started talking to 2 young guys in the casino. Then it ended up being 3 or 4, and then it was 5 or 6, and then I started holding court. So I said to them the next day, but it was time, getting ready to go home. I said, you ought to do something like that. These kids are here, take advantage of it.
You bet.
So anyway, they contacted Harley first, and then Harley called me and said, would you do this with me? I said, well, sure. So that's how we got started training people together. And then when he started doing the Noah camps, Ricky was the first guy that came in there with us. And then from there, the 3 of us started, we put a name to Elite Pro Wrestling Training. But it was, we were I think we were the first guys to do what we called a super camp, multi-days with more than 1 trainer. And that's part of, I guess, my legacy as well, that I've been innovative in so many different fields. And I don't even know why. I mean, I never considered myself to be that smart, but you mentioned Red. I love Red Bastine.
I did too.
Greatest
he sat right behind me here
in the world.
Sat right behind me here, Red Bastine, a couple of times, and we had a few beers right behind me back in the day.
When I was putting together the TV for Fuller here, he bought the territory, and I was bouncing back and forth between Charlotte and here between November of 74 and November of 77. For 3 years, I was back and forth between the 2 territories. But when he wanted me to build his TV for him, Ron did, I was telling Red. We were on our way. I know exactly where we were going, to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Just Red and I. And I told him I had this idea of doing a 5-minute pre-tape segment called Personality Profile in the middle of the show. Can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do it? Well, you're doing a low key. I said, I'm trying to, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I'm trying to get the person more than just the guy as a wrestler, a good wrestler, over to the people, because there's something else to sell. Yeah, but you'll kill your heat. You have to build your heat all over again. Okay, we'll see. And we discussed it all the way to Fayetteville. And all, I mean, we weren't arguing, but the pros and cons. And of course, Red said it's not going to work. So, and the reason I came up with the idea, twofold. One was in '66 in Atlanta, the first time I was on the TV, Leo mentioned the drag racing. He said, is that a shoot or is that you? I said, yeah, it's a shoot. He said, well, then I'm going to have Ed, it was Ed Capra was announcer. He said, I'm going to have Ed bring that up. Do you know anything about drag racing in Georgia? Which I did from the NHRA newspapers. And so we talked about drag racing. So the following Monday night in Augusta at Bell Auditorium, this lady comes up and she said, my grandson wants to meet you and get your autograph. He was, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, I guess. And so I'm signing the autograph book for him. And I say, you come to Bell Auditorium every Monday with your grandmother? And before he could say anything, she said, it's the first time he's ever been here. I said, really? Wow. Well, he comes to the house every Saturday night to watch TV with me, watch wrestling on TV. But he heard you talking about hot rods and he wanted to meet you. And the light bulb went off. I just sold a ticket to a wrestling show, not because of my wrestling or anybody else's, because we had something in common. Right. Then I got to thinking about this over a period of time, right? If you're a NASCAR fan, I can almost bet that whatever driver you like the best is driving the kind of car you're driving, right? I follow right now. I'm not a Houston football. I'm not a fan of the NFL franchise in Houston, but since Stroud is there and I'm a Buckeye, I pay attention to Stroud, right? Because of the connection. And then I noticed that in the NFL, before they had 5 analysts at the halftime, they needed something besides marching bands. So they started doing something similar. They didn't call it personality, but like I remember seeing, I forget who it was, some drooling, crazy, animalistic defensive lineman that his hobby was making pottery. Like, so from ripping guys' heads off to doing something artistic. And I thought, yeah, okay. And you're giving the people a look at behind the scenes to a degree, right? Of course, I realized in 1974 when we were going to start doing this, you couldn't do, the heels couldn't say, yeah, I love my wife and I don't kick my dog when I go home. But the baby faces, you could still do the heels on, but and get things over. So anyway, a lot of the older guys didn't think it would work, but it did. It worked in spades. Well, an example of that, Bob Armstrong and I did one of the first ones I'd ever done there, and he and I traveled quite a bit together in Georgia, and so I said, you remember we used to play this game, and I'd name a doo-wop song, and he'd tell me the group, and then he'd name a song, and I had to tell him the group, and of course, whoever blew it, the other guy was the winner. So I said, you remember that game we used to play when we were on the road? Yeah, he said, the one I always won. I said, no, wait a minute, you didn't always win it. He said, well, let's find out. So he threw a group at me, and I gave him he threw a song at me, and I named the group. I threw one back at him, and he named the group. And I'm watching the back timer, so it's time to cue out the segment. So we do. Next Friday night at the Knoxville Coliseum, this lady walks up to me, and she said, you're Mr. Thatcher? I said, yes, ma'am. Well, I'm the secretary for Professor so-and-so, who's head of, I forget, it's been too many years ago, so-and-so's a department at the University of Tennessee. And he wondered, he heard you and Mr. Armstrong talking about doo-wop music from the 50s and wondered if that was just part of the show or you really were into that. I said, no, ma'am, we both are really into it. She said, well, he would like you both to answer these. She handed me two self-addressed stamped envelopes. Each had 2 typewritten pages with questions about doo-wop. He wanted to see how good we really were, right?
Wow. Wow.
So, but yeah, so now but the funny thing is, fast forward, by now, Dory Jr. had come through as a champion and traveling all over. Red was helping Shire's book in Frisco at the time.
Right.
So anyway, Dory had called Ron and he said, dub me a copy of the personality profile I did with Les and send it out here. Roy wants to see it. And I knew that, but I didn't think anything about it. So my phone rings one day and it's the redhead. He said, I guess I owe you an apology. I said, for what? What do you owe? He said, well, that segment that I told you wouldn't work. I said, yeah. He said, it's working. Do you mind if I steal it? I said, no, Red, I'd be proud if you steal it.
That's great. That's awesome.
But yeah.
Les, let's talk about when we mention the fans. You guys, each night, it's your job to go out and obviously to entertain the fans.
Right.
But it's your job to make them love you or make you hate you, whatever it is, whatever role you're in. And in that day, you had mentioned earlier about, not having computers and internet and all that stuff. And that is where I guess we want to go to the WFIA, because we were in an era in the 60s and the 70s and certainly well into the 80s where I lived in the Twin Cities, as you know, and unless I was going to a different town somewhere else, I had no clue and no way of finding out who wrestled who, why they wrestled, who won, who was the baby, who was the heel. And I couldn't have any idea that they switched off sometimes. You're a heel here, but a baby here. And the territories were that way. So the promoters could literally, they could tell us anything that, fans, this is exclusive for Minneapolis, and we'd believe it. And what little we'd get from a newsstand magazine, oh boy, I'd like to see this guy. We'd see that Roger Kirby or Les Thatcher. Boy, look at this. I've never seen these guys before, and they'd be fun to see. So we know that in that era, and it happened in the later 60s, a guy named Don Wilson out of St. Louis, he came up with the idea to have this World Wrestling Fans International Association. And it basically was a fan club organization where we could bring fans from other areas of the country. We could have fans from New York and from Indianapolis and from Houston and from California and come to a certain city and all mingle together and share stories of their favorite wrestlers and show pictures and have the wrestlers appear and that were in that territory. And that was what the original WFIA was. It was based on fan clubs.
Right.
I think every wrestler of any note back in the later 60s, 70s, and 80s had a fan club. There was a fan club
in the 50s too.
Yeah.
Because as a kid, I belonged to Buddy Rogers fan club, the Don Arnold fan club, and the Ruffy Silverstein fan club.
And talk about a good wrestler, Ruffy Silverstein. Holy cow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those fan clubs, I mean, they were run by, in most cases, just fans.
Right.
Who,
and mostly women. I mean, with the exception of some.
Well, Buddy Rogers, who was his fan club president? She was
Georgiana Macropolis. Yeah, she
later became
kind of like the heavyweight champion of fan club presidents.
Yeah, because she had Bruno Sammartino too.
Yeah.
I mean, the fan clubs were just, you wanted to join the fan club if you were a fan of whatever wrestler, and in most cases, the wrestlers were fairly cooperative. I know back in the day they wouldn't come out of kayfabe in most cases, and that was certainly understandable, and I appreciated that they didn't. But they would work with their fan club president. I ran a short-lived fan club for Ramon Torres. And I tell you what, I couldn't tell you at the time a nicer human being. How well he treated me, and how respectful.
All three of them were
all three of them, you bet. But I mean, I only had to work closely with Ramon.
Yeah.
And he was just as kind as whatever I asked him to do, he would do. And he said, whatever you want. And when he'd come into town, he'd take me to lunch. We'd go into Minneapolis and we'd have lunch, and he'd talk with me. And he never really broke kayfabe with me, but he understood that I understood that, wrestling was predetermined, and he didn't insult me. And I always appreciated that. So, but you had a fan club. Who was your fan club?
Pierce had my fan club, and the Shamrock News was her newsletter. Who was Uncle somebody or other who made a big
Bert Ray or Bert Ray.
Uncle Bert Ray. I remember the uncle part, who sent results from Christ all over the world, it seemed like.
Bert Ray was the one that originally started a kind of a different type of fan club, in that he was sharing results from all over, and profiles from all over, which was unique. His first, the major one was Matt Mania. That was the name of it. And we should point this out since you brought that up, Les. That was the predecessor to when Bert Ray got out of Matt Mania. He turned it over, the fan club, to our late buddy, Jim Melby.
Is that right?
Yeah. And Jim took it over, and that's how I met Jim back in 1968. Bert Ray, I think, had some business opportunities going on or something, and he turned it over to Jim, who was 19 years old at the time, and I was 17, and I subscribed to the Matt Mania. And I got my first issue, and it was called Wrestling Results, and it was by Jim Melby. And I was totally confused. So I wrote a letter. You talk about snail mail. I wrote this nasty letter to this Jim Melby saying I paid $5 for this, and I get this Wrestling Results thing. Melby called me on the phone. He lived in St. Paul. I was in Cottage Grove, a suburb of St. Paul. And he called me on the phone one night. Never met him, called him. We talked 2 hours. And he said, we live in the same city. And we talked, and he became seriously my best wrestling friend ever out as a fan. And Jim and I, we traveled the highways for baseball games, wrestling spot shows, concerts, you name it. And
I mentioned to you guys about flying to Minneapolis to talk to Verne after the WFIA convention in Kansas City. And Jim, he took me out to his house and showed me I walked in this room.
I know.
There, 3 of the 4 walls were floor to ceiling 33 and a third record albums.
Oh, yes.
Some I have never heard of in my life, and they probably were one of, and the band folded or something after that.
Yeah.
And he and Bob Mould were going to take me to First Avenue.
Yeah.
Because I love Prince.
And for those that don't know Bob Mould, he was in a group called Husker Du. And he was also a great, I think he did a lot of great songs. Yeah, I bowled with Bob Mould.
He also wrote wrestling for WCW.
Yep, he did.
Yeah, I was surprised about that. But and then Jim was road manager for Husker Du.
Yes, he was.
For a while, because when they came and played Bogarts in Cincinnati, which is near University of Cincinnati. He got in touch with me and said, we're coming to town. So I said, call me when you get in. So he called me and told me where they were staying. He said, are there any good old record shops around? I said, yeah, there's one over in Pleasant Ridge. Can we go to it? I said, sure, I'll come get you. And he bought about a dozen albums, I think, at that shop.
I'll tell you, when you talk about those vinyl record albums with Jim Melby, he was a great music fan. I mean, and it didn't matter what genre. He loved music, and he had those big 33 record albums. And like you say, the walls, ceiling, the floor, you had to see it, Brian, to appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I
Oh, I
teased
can
Jim.
imagine.
And I teased Jim. I mean, we're talking literally thousands of records. Thousands.
Yes. I thought I had a fair sized collection of about.
Right. And I told Jim, I
350.
said, if that house ever starts on fire, I said, they're never going to put it out. Oh, man. Yeah. That's
Death
great.
by
story.
vinyl. That's
Yeah. Vinyl
Yeah.
record. So
Yeah.
that's what happened with Uncle Bert, as you talked about him, Bert Ray. And then Melby started wrestling results. But, the thing was, in 1969, that was the first ever WFIA convention, and it was in, of all places, Mankato, Minnesota. Don Wilson, at the time, his wife Judy, they put on a great convention. And what they would do in those days, for the fans that don't know, because we want to talk about what we're doing with WFIA today, but they would go into a territory, work with a local promoter. In this case, for the first one, they worked with Norm Keatzer, who was the publisher for Wrestling News and etc. And he promoted cards in southern Minnesota.
Is Norm still around?
Norm is now, I think he's like 88, and he's got some health issues.
Oh, I didn't realize he was older than me. I didn't think anybody was older than me.
I got a Christmas card from him with a nice letter. He sends a card. We send cards every year, but he sent a nice letter just a couple months ago, and talks about his health not being good. But yeah, he's still with us. He admits that, everybody else knows more than he does now because he can't remember half of it. But hey, isn't that where we're all getting? So,
all these guys we're talking about, Brian, they were like the Minnesota Mafia, right?
Yeah.
They converge on these conventions. And
if I did a book,
if
I did a book on the road trips that Melby and Keatzer and I took and rode and drove to and from, we could all three probably be arrested. We had some interesting times. That's, wow.
Look, you know what though? I thought you're right. I was at 3 of the conventions. The one here in Knoxville. I was also the commentator, the host, or whatever I was, and I hosted the one in Atlanta too.
Mm-hmm.
But they were a lot of fun. The fans were respectful and caring, and it was just a good time. I thought, the banquet, were a lot of fun. I'll tell you, crazy. Here in '78, Cornette won Best Action Photo by a Fan. And I used to tease Jimmy when I was working for him. I said, you give me too much static, I'm going to tell these people, Jim won Best Action Photo by a fan at a wrestling convention. So, but yeah, Eddie Gilbert he was just a fan.
Sure.
Tommy brought him to the convention here.
Well, the unique thing about the WFIA is that, yes, most of the people that attended them were just fans. They'd love to get an autograph on a picture or get a picture with a wrestler. That was a big deal at the time, so they could go home and have bragging rights. And then, there was the small group of fans who were very, I call them more serious fans, in that they were nuts like me, where I wanted to get to know the wrestlers. I wanted to help put them over. I wanted to enhance their careers if I could by doing stories, which I ended up doing, and Jim Melby and Norm and Tom Burke, Tom,
Sure.
and Dave Brzezinski, who is, went on to being a manager in the business.
Tom Burke may be the only guy that knows Les Milady, the wrestler.
Well, I know Les Milady, the wrestler.
Well, but Tom, when I broke in New England, right?
Yes.
And he was covering all the newspapers there. And when I first met him, he said, "Oh, I know Les Milady." When I was Les Thatcher when I first met him.
Yeah.
I said, "Really? Okay."
But we wanted to be to be in with the wrestlers, and it was hard because we had to earn their respect. And many times, you know, you mentioned Red Bastien, and there's so many wrestlers we can mention that they knew that you weren't going to try to expose the business or ruin the business, or they knew that you were there to support them. And then they would appreciate you. And as we got older, we realized that they were our friends. And you mentioned the dressing room, the locker room, when you said that they were in different locker rooms, the heels and the babies. And, you know, our buddy Red Bastien, he was the guy that let me for the very first time come into the locker room, into a locker room with him. He said, come on in.
That was a big deal back then.
It was.
Yes.
And I remember, you know, Les, I can tell you, I remember walking through the door with him, and everybody was jabbering in there. But when the door opened and here's this kid, me,
right,
you hear the proverbial pin drop. And Red, God bless him, to this day, he said, the boy's okay. And everybody just went about their business. And I heard a lot of this carny talk going on, the kayfabe, you know, whatever. Half of it I didn't, but everybody was fine. And I got no shuns from them. And Red Bastien was the guy that did that.
I can tease all Chiazari to Diaz in a dressing room and nobody will understand a word I'm saying.
Well, I always tell people that it's kind of a form of pig Latin, but a little more sophisticated.
Yeah. It's the business has changed, but yeah, that was a great time. And two, most of the mainline wrestling magazines had a fan club section or a fan club.
By all means. Yep. And Don Wilson, who was the founder of the WFIA, he used to be the fan club columnist for Wrestling Review magazine, which was one of the best newsstand magazines of that era. And then both Tom Burke and myself and Georgianne Orsi, Macropolis, you called her earlier, but all of us had fan club columns in the magazines later on, putting other fan clubs over. So we tried to keep that alive. And these WFIA conventions, you know, like I said, the promoter would go into a territory. They would not only hold a banquet, they'd have a room set up in the hotel where all the fans could display their fan club pictures and have their honoree, you know, put over. And then they would put on a wrestling card for the WFIA fans. Right. And it was always very special to so that was the predecessor, I think, of what our big organizations are today, where they have these gatherings and you know, the CAC kind of has evolved into what WFIA used to be, except all the wrestlers are now paid to sign an autograph and pictures, etc.
Right. Yeah, things have changed. Well, you know, the other thing too about fan clubs back then, wrestlers were accessible.
Yes.
You know, you could walk up by the dressing room and talk to the wrestler. I mean, you know, you go, my God, if wrestling fans bring you cakes and cookies. And when Danny Miller and I went into the Carolinas as a number 2 babyface team.
You were a great tag team, by the way, too.
Thank you. I love working with Danny. I did. There was a couple ladies made us jackets, right? With the state of Ohio on the back, and his hometown marked with a star, and on my jacket, Cincinnati was marked with a star, you know. But I mean, they worried about, you know, when I went back to the Carolinas, when Danny and I went in there in 71, it's a couple of the older ladies, you're letting your hair grow over your ears. Yes, ma'am. Do you like that? I said, I'm the same person that you liked when I was here in 68. And I said, I haven't changed a bit, just my hair is. But, you know, at that time in the Carolinas, Briscoe, Gerald and I were the only 2 guys that had long hair, 2 baby faces, you know, and I had my mustache at that point too. Well, when Hall and Kirby and I were together, because Curb was a natural blonde, Dennis and I, you know, bleached our hair, but we were baby faces. I worked heel briefly for up in Eastern Canada in 70 until they turned me babyface. But of course, in Canada in 70, if you were of draft age, they figured if you were an American, you were a draft dodger, or you had to be.
Sure.
You must be here to skip hide from the draft, right? But yeah, it was mustaches and long hair wasn't the a big style at that initially in our business. But yeah, it's crazy how things have changed.
The one thing about the WFIA is you mentioned you were in Kansas City, Knoxville, and Atlanta, and Kansas City was where you and I first hooked up. And what they did that night, Brian, and for those listening, it was the usual where we had the big hotel room and we had the banquet, and they would list wrestler of the year, tag team of the year, and give out these awards for the local area. And they had a wrestling card. I don't remember where it was. It was a spot show that a bunch of the fans at the convention were going to drive to. And I mean, I know it was
I didn't go to that, no.
And we didn't go to that. You and I and a couple of others, but you and I, we didn't. And we sat in this big rotunda of the top of the hotel. It was one of these revolving.
It rotated.
It rotated. You were there an hour and you were looking out a different window. We sat there. We literally, I think we sat there till the wee hours.
We closed. We didn't. They didn't run out of beer or anything.
No.
But we closed.
But I will. The reason I bring that up is because that's where I met Les. And again, when we were talking about wrestlers appreciating fans who weren't going to be there to try to blow the whistle on them or call them fake or any of this stuff. And that was the night that I think I earned Les's respect. And you treated me as a fellow person in the business. So I thank you.
You can outdrink me. I respected. Of course, anybody can outdrink me.
Yeah.
That's not a big. You know what else? That was unique. That because we went to a Royals game. Kansas City.
We did. Yeah.
I think they played the Blue Jays, I believe.
I don't remember who they played.
But I remember the ball. I remember going to the Melby went.
Yeah, Melby was with us. Yeah.
Diane Devine went.
Oh, sweetheart, yes.
And we went up to St. Joe to visit Ronnie.
Yep.
And I kept watching my
Ronnie
back.
Etchison.
Yeah, and that this bar, Brian, was Ronnie even said, he said, now just mind your business and don't pay attention to anybody. And I'm thinking, are we going to get out of here? Of course, with Ronnie was the bouncer, so it was. But also, I got a payday. Wasn't expecting. Harley was wrestling Flair in Kansas City during that. Yeah. And Bob came to me and he said, we're taping Race and Flair, and would you call play-by-play? He said, I'll pay you. And I said, sure. That tape's floating around someplace, but that was just, and I also remember that Kirby introduced me to Scott Hall and Marty Jannetty, and they both gave Roger a lot of credit for them improving as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I remember that too. Yeah,
it's crazy that all these stories. You've done so much. I was reading through your resume again, and you were in the business. I mean, you were a wrestler, then you were a commentator. You worked on TV shows. You did
magazines,
and all these other You're a bodybuilder for a number of years, winning championships. I guess in the wrestling aspect, because you did a lot in there collectively, what, besides wrestling yourself, what did you enjoy the most? Was it the commentating? Was it the magazines, writing and editing, or was it the TV shows?
Will it be what will it upset you if I just say I enjoyed all of it? I did. I mean, the crazy thing is I realize that my adult life, I worked at things I loved and enjoyed. Yeah. Well, I mentioned bodybuilding. I competed till I was 54 years old and worked with pro bodybuilders. So yeah,
Well,
And I wish I could still stay young and continue to do all that, right? I mean, I can still train guys. I
Right.
mean, I'm not senile yet. I'm not going to get in and take bumps. I'm not going to show them how to take a backdrop. I can tell them how to take a backdrop, but I don't tend to show. But yeah, but you know, here's the crazy thing: the broadcasting, the magazines, the training. I set out to be a wrestler. I never set out to do these other things, right? But it's just like being in the right place or well, like with the broadcasting, I went up to Eastern Canada to work for Rudy Kay, who was my next door neighbor, and we worked tag team matches together in the Carolinas in 67, 68. He lived next door to Dennis Hall and I, he and his wife and the kids. So anyway, I went up to wrestle for him. And he calls me one day. We wrestled in Moncton. That's where we live, Moncton, on Monday night. Then we went to Halifax on Tuesday for Halifax, and then stayed over and did their TV there on Wednesday. So he called me. He just started shooting the breeze with me, and he said, "Remember when we were running up and down the roads? You said you might like to try to be a broadcaster. You like work. You want, you know, because Solly and I hit it off. Not just about wrestling." But he was in the race cars too. So we had that in common. Plus he had a 67 Firebird that I loved, and he let me drive it a couple times. So anyway, Rudy said, yeah. I said, yeah. He said, well, when you pack for Halifax, be sure to bring a coat and tie. I said, why? He said, well, my announcer had a death in his family in Toronto and had to go to Toronto. He's going to be there for a couple of weeks at least. So I need somebody to fill in, and you're the guy. Now,
wow.
All the Ks were noted for their ribbing, right? So at first I'm thinking, this is going to be a rib. I'm going to take a suit with me, come into the station with a suit on and say, we got you, didn't we? You're not really. But he finally convinced me it was, okay, you're going to do this. So now there were no co-hosts back then.
Right.
I had been interviewed, but I had no clue how to cue in and out of a segment or any of that, right? I got through it some way, shape, or form. But anyway, so I thought I was just going to do it for a few weeks. So about the third week, he came to me. He said, you're doing a good job. I'm going to let him stay in Toronto. It's home for him. And you're going to finish out the season, and I'll take care of you, right? So that's how I got started in broadcasting. Now, when I came to the States, I didn't, I'm a wrestler. Well, he wanted me to come back to the Maritimes the next season, but he just wanted me to work in the office, produce a show, produce a TV show, and be the lead announcer. And I wanted to wrestle, man. I've only been in 10 years, right? I've got a lot of bumps to take. So I passed on it. So anyway, we mentioned it, jumping around different places, and we end up back in the Carolinas in 71, Danny Miller and I. And I'm in the office one day, and Lord Littlebrook's in there, and he said to Mr. Crockett, this is Jim Sr., he said, why isn't Les on your TV? And Mr. Crockett looked at him, he said, well, Brooke, he is on my TV. No, Mr. Crockett, I mean, why isn't he one of your announcers? And Mr. Crockett said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, he did Rudy's TV last year and did a great job. And Mr. Crockett looked, he said, well, you never told me. I said, I never thought it was important. Yeah. So we talked about it, and he said, so I want you to try it. So I sat in with Bob Cottle. I sat in with Jim, there's a Charlotte announcer, Bill Ward. And so then he worked me into, I was doing the B show and out of Raleigh, and then it was handling all the promos. And so it just escalated from there. Then Atlanta, Briscoe bought into Atlanta, him and Tim Woods, and the war was going on down there. And that was the craziest thing. They wanted me in Atlanta, and Jimmy didn't want me to go, right? And they were trying. So anyway, Eddie Graham calls me, and he said, we want you in Atlanta, and they don't want you to go. So here's my idea. Give your notice and tell them you're coming to Tampa to wrestle. On your way to Tampa, drop your furniture and stuff off in Atlanta. come down here and wrestle for a month and then go back and do the damn television recording, right?
Wow.
And I'm thinking, I had such a great relationship with the entire Crockett family. I mean, really, they treated me well, and I love them all for it. And I didn't want to ruin that relationship, right? So at some point, Jimmy ended up not Jim Sr., but Jim Jr., his father passed already. He relented. So I got to go and work with Gordon, which was a huge plus. Plus working in the office with Watts and Leo and listen, with the booking and everything and doing the broadcasting. And I did the program that Leo had been doing. But magazines, I walked again, starting in Charlotte. I was in there, nothing. I picked up a like you've seen these back then, George, where they put like a thumbnail sketch under a picture and you could get an autograph, right? They've got everybody in the territories in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one of those there. And so I'm just looking through it and I said to Mr. Crockett, I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Crockett, these are pretty nice books. You don't put them out anymore." And whoever it was, and again, I don't remember who, somebody had done those for him and they were no longer with the company or in town or whatever. And I said, "Wow, it's too bad." He said, "Why don't you do one?" I said, "Well, why don't you try one?" Okay. So we did. And which escalated into, hang on.
All right.
A history lesson in progress.
Yeah. Here we go.
There you go.
That. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The one and only NWA magazine put out by Jimmy. This is the same style. I don't have any of the Mid-Atlantics here. Or after I started doing the Mid-Atlantic, George Napolitano and Vince McMahon got in touch with me, and they wanted so I did 5 issues of WWF wrestling action for Vince, and then I did Rocket the Mid-Atlantic magazines, artist rendered covers. Nobody's done it since.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. It's a theme. We could do a theme cover. We had the artist do it. We did centerfolds. Nobody was doing centerfolds. I'm not sure. But anyway, this NWA magazine has 1 page for each of the Alliance members. So Jimmy comes back from the Alliance meeting and calls me into the office. And he said, "Just got back from the Alliance meeting. I got a little project for you." "A little project? Oh, what's that?" "You're going to do a magazine for the entire Alliance." And you got to get in touch with each office to get pictures, ideas for stories, et cetera, et cetera. But I designed them. It was these, I mean, it professionally laid out, but I did the rough design. And with the artist, I did some stick figure, sketches to show him my ideas. Then he would draw up something, and that's how we got started with magazines. These suckers sold for $2 a piece, right? I wish I had 1,000 of them, because these Mid-Atlantic these go for $125. The Mid-Atlantic magazines goes for $100. And
I got to put them in the vault tonight.
Huh?
I got to put them in the vault tonight. I have some.
Yeah.
Hey, I remember Jimmy coming out, and maybe like Jackie, his brother, the youngest of the brothers. He and I are in the break room, right? "You guys busy?" "No, not right now." "Well, got all those old magazines out in the warehouse. Why don't you guys see about, they're no good to us, pitch them." I thought, oh my God. When I first saw them at a Charlotte convention, they were like, somebody was selling them for $5 or $6, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said, wow, but yeah, but I still throwing them out. I should have put those boxes in the trunk of my car.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
One of the things I'll say about that, Les, is I think promotions back in the old territory days, a lot of them didn't understand the fact that the programs, for example, that from the match, from the card, they didn't understand that those programs, in time, they will be valuable. I remember I'd go up to the Minneapolis wrestling office and they'd have on the floor next to one of the desks the remaining programs from a card last week or 2 weeks ago, and they were going to toss them out.
Yeah.
It's like, what's wrong with you people, And a lot of them didn't understand the magic in selling the promotional 8x10 glossy photos of wrestlers, or putting out a photo album of wrestlers that are in the territory,
Right.
because fans longed for that stuff. And
I'll tell you, Brian, before gimmick tables,
yeah,
all we had was glossy black and white 8x10s at $1 a piece. I remember we could buy them at Mass Photo Print. I think it was in Houston, Texas.
Yep.
Get 100 of them for $10, right? And we'd sell them for $1 a piece. Well, we're talking about things that just happened.
Yeah.
I had this, back in the 60s, and then his T-shirts. Everybody's got T-shirt. Everybody's wearing something that's got a logo, music, bands, right? I'll think baseball, basketball. I think, okay, heels probably not, but yeah, shouldn't baby faces do T-shirts? And now I mentioned this to a couple promoters, and they didn't say the idea was bad. They just weren't interested in doing it, right? And Jack and Jerry Briscoe and I were sitting around Jerry's apartment one night, drinking a few beers and probably doing a few other things too, which
no, you never did that, right?
Oh, yes, we were doing a few other things. Why not be honest about it? That's better than the beer. Yeah. Anyway, just talking in general, right? About nothing in particular. And I mentioned my frustration, that I think this is a good idea. And Jack says, well, why don't we do it? I said, he said, why don't the three of us kick in the money? So we did. And the first T-shirt, pro wrestling T-shirt ever on the market, was put out by Jack and Jerry Briscoe and Les Thatcher. Briscoe Booster T-shirt, artwork, Jerry Lawler. Aspiring young wrestler trying to get his feet firmly planted on the ground. But yeah, that's how I wish I teased Jerry. I said, if the wrestling T-shirt industry would just give us 1% of the net, neither one of us would ever work again, for Christ's
Well, and
sake.
the other thing, Les, that I don't think promoters were totally aware of or on board with is, like you said, maybe the baby faces come up with T-shirts or whatever it might be. There were always those fans, even back then, that they liked one of the heels. Yeah. And they could have put a heel shirt out or something, and they would buy it. And I remember when our buddy Lars Anderson, he and Buddy Wolf, they were doing shirt shacks, which back in the day,
I remember Lars coming. Was it an Aspen? He had an Aspen. Yeah, because I remember him coming to Charlotte to visit.
Yeah.
He was hot. Well, I saw in a INC period magazine, he was a featured, but the way they had that T-shirt business of theirs had grown too. Yeah.
Well, and one of the greatest things when we talk about heels or wanting to buy something that for the heels, one of the greatest genius moves was when Bobby Heenan was in the AWA. And of course, he was the Weasel. He was Bobby the Brain Heenan, but the fans called him the Weasel, and they were selling Weasel posters. Yay big with a weasel, the animal, but with Bobby's face on it.
Right.
And they were selling them. And Bobby would come out and he would say, and I don't want to see any, and he's irate, I don't want to see any of these Weasel, I'm Bobby the Brain. Well, Bobby was the one that made the posters and was selling them. And that is perfect.
Yeah, it's like heels selling their picture to one of their friends comes out and tears up the heels picture. So now all these people running by the heels picture so they can tear them up too.
Yeah.
You know what Bobby was doing when I first met him? Washing cars at the Ford dealership in Indianapolis and carrying jackets.
Yep. He would carry the rain jackets back and forth we used to mow Bruiser's lawn.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, when he wrestled a little bit before he ever started managing too. Yeah. I remember coming in the building, I forget which building we're in Indianapolis, And Bobby, I said, what? He seemed nervous. And what's wrong? Oh, I'm wrestling Prince Pullins tonight, Calvin Pullins. I said,
Yeah.
okay. He's going to stretch me. I said, what are you talking about? Oh, he said he's going to stretch me. I said, Bobby, he's not going to. No, Bobby is nervous as hell, right? So I found Calvin or Prince, whatever you want to call him. I said, you realize you're not going to have a match worth a damn tonight. He said, why? I said, Bobby's nervous as a whore in church, for Christ's sake. He thinks you're going to stretch him. I said, go tell him the truth or he'll pass out there if you're not careful, right?
Yeah.
I love Bobby to death. He's such a great guy. Well, you know, again, we're talking about coincidence. That's how I got to be a trainer. Now, Jim Dillon, Scott Casey will tell you that they pulled my coattail, but that was a whole different thing. I was wrestling at the time. But yeah, the first beautiful Bob Harmon, who was a Cincinnati boy, called me one day. And at the time, I was working for Perillo Performance, training bodybuilders and doing competitive bodybuilding myself. And I just started doing Cornette's Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but I still live in Cincy. So anyway, Bob's telling me, said, this guy's got a wrestling school here. He's got an idiot as a trainer. And if he doesn't get a good trainer, you know, he's going to lose his students and he's going to lose his kid. I said, well, I feel bad for him, but why are you telling me this? Well, you're the guy that should be there. I said, what? You're out of your mind. No. So he said, they're having a show on the west side of town Saturday night. He said, go with me to the show and meet some of these and, you know, see what you think. So I went. It's first, I had never been to an independent wrestling show in my life, and I was horrified, to be quite frank. My business has turned into this. Whoa, it's amateur night. Anyway, I'm sitting here, Bob's sitting next to me, and the guy that owns the school is on the other side of Bob. These two guys are in the ring, and the one guy goes out and picks up a chair. And I could tell by the way he was holding the chair, he didn't know what the hell to do with it. And he nails his opponent, rung the guy's bell pretty. The guys wandering around in the ring. They had to go out and get him out of there. And I thought, Jesus Christ. I leaned over to Bob and I said, ask him how long this kid's been training. I said, he didn't have a clue how to use that chair. Bob leans over to me. He said, he's been to 4 practices.
Oh my God.
Right. He shouldn't have been in the ring, never mind swinging a chair at anybody. And that's what made, okay, I'll try this to see.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, it's that being in the right place at the right time as we go through life. That's what it's all about.
I guess, you know, but I'm as amazed as anybody. Gee, you're a good trainer. I don't know, I guess. I mean, but I wasn't aware, except that I love the damn business so much. It's
that's the reason you were.
Who I am, it's what I do.
Yeah. That's the reason you were a good trainer, because you loved the business.
Well, that's the reason so many guys that, you know, I mentioned about Cornette. I said, some of these young guys, well, he's this. I said, you know what he is? He's one of the damn smartest wrestling minds that's still above ground. That's who he is. Exactly. And I know he doesn't present his opinions a way that you might like them, but 9 times out of 10, he is spot on. He knows exactly what he's talking about.
Right. Yeah.
But you know what? These when I went down, well, I went down for a week as a guest coach at the PC, WWE's Performance Center. It's been a couple of years ago. And Terry Taylor, who also credits me with helping him when he got started, was one of the trainers there. So he said, you know, you can't yell at these kids. I said, what? Oh, you can't yell at these kids. And I look and I see there's a guy standing about 6'5", about 280, hard as a rock. And I said, Terry, I'm going over and yell at him. And if I intimidate him, that's going to make my day. Believe me, if he's intimidated by a little old man my age, yelling at him. I mean, come on. And I've told some of these kids, I said, if you can't stand to have somebody yell at you, if you'd have broke in when I broke in, you'd have been gone the first hour you were in the ring.
Right.
Because you dumb son of a bitch, what are you doing?
Well, and that's just it. You talk to any guy, any wrestler, and there were hundreds of them that ever came out of Verne's camp. Verne, that was his favorite thing. He yelled, and those guys, they learned, you know, Verne's going to yell at us, but when we walk out of here, we're going to know how to do it. That's what.
Yeah. You know, Santos' school doesn't get a lot of credit, I don't guess. But besides me, Dusty broke in there 9 years after me.
Yep.
Rufus R. Jones broke in there. Luke Graham broke in there.
Yes.
So there must have been something going on right there. But
well, and there were so many great places for the wrestlers to go in those days.
Well, you know, you mentioned the change. Every time you changed territory, it was like going to a new college. You know, a little different style, or a little, you know, baby faces comebacks were a little different in this place than they were in that other, you know, that sort of thing. And the kids today, I've been doing this 15 minutes. I know everything.
Yeah.
Gotcha. You're there.
Yeah. And that's how long your career is, 15 minutes.
Well, and you know, the other thing, if you look at the one poster behind me where Les Milady is wrestling Pat Patterson.
Pat Patterson, I see that.
Yeah.
I got to work with Pat when he was just like me.
Yeah.
You know, just getting his feet. The funny thing was, you know, I mentioned Buddy Rogers was my childhood idol. Pat was crazy for Kowalski. And when I wrestled Pat, purple trunks, purple robe, purple boots, just like Kowalski.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, gents, we better, we've been talking for about an hour and a half, so.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Started. We can do this again sometime if you guys want.
I know. Are you going to be in Iowa this July?
The good Lord willing. Well, let's talk about that while we're talking here.
Okay.
You guys need to get a hold of somebody, get you a poster. We're doing a training in Waterloo.
I saw that on Facebook. Yeah.
Let me
talk just a little bit about
go
that.
to the glasses.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Of course, Waterloo is the 17th, 18th, and 19th on the night Saturday. Training starts at 9 a.m. at the convention center. Myself, Ron Hutchison, D'Lo Brown, Joe Malenko, and James Beard. Over 200 years of experience combined. It's 125 for it's 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Lunch will be served. Get a souvenir T-shirt. But if you add another 75 to that, you do the whole weekend. The banquet, awards bank. And you know, I've told a lot of young guys, you need to go there once at least. When I was inducted in 23, when I walked in there and started to look around, I thought, I'm home.
Yeah.
Like I belong here, you know? Last year, when I walked in and I saw my jacket and my boots, I thought, oh my God, that's me.
Yeah, I was there last year and I saw that. I talked to you for a few minutes. You probably don't remember. You had a lot of people you were going through, talking to and everything. But I will say Waterloo, that atmosphere is probably the best Hall of Fame event that I've ever, and I've been to a few of them.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that the wrestlers, the whole organization itself is just first class. Those guys were so nice all day, even at night across the street at the hotel. You go up and talk to them. They didn't care. You weren't like bothering them or anything.
I had a good time.
It was great.
If anybody listening to you guys, they can email info@WrestleConnex, and it's all one WrestleConnex in one word, CONNEX.com for information or to sign up. But yeah, get some posters from George, from Gloria or Scott Hosey. They've all, you know, and spread them around for us and see if we can't, you know, get a crowd, because people need to see that place. And, you know,
I will put it down at the bottom too in the description when we.
Yeah.
This will be coming out here
Real
on
quick,
Monday,
I want to
so-
mention I am doing a camp April 11, 12, and 13 in Kingsport, Tennessee. It's called Wrestling for the Kingdom. So there's going to be some fellowship each morning. 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Start at 9 a.m., break for lunch. Lunch will be catered. We go to 5 on Friday, go to 4 on Saturday, and there's a show that night. So some of the guys will be picked for that, and go from 9 to 3 on Sunday, lunch each day. So and it's $200 for the whole weekend. And we had George South is going to be one of the trainers along with me.
Okay.
And a couple of the top indie guys, Brad Thomas and Matt Sigmund and Chance Prophet. So we had last year we had about 25 or 30 kids there, and we did it last year, and it was a lot of fun. And if anybody listening to us now would be interested in that camp, you can go to where's it at, Les? To sign up, Sigmund Wrestling, Sigmund, SIGMON Wrestling at gmail.com for more information or to sign up. And you know what? If you're a young wrestler and you're paying attention, I don't care how much experience you got, you never have enough. I've been doing this 65 years and I still learn things. And if you're looking for a wrestling school, be sure it's somebody who has been there, done that.
Right.
Don't look for price. You cannot get a Corvette for the price of a Hyundai Civic. You just can't do that, right? And you can't get a top trainer for nothing. Well,
Right.
I mentioned $300 is what I paid for 6 months training in 1960, right? When I sold school in 2002, I was getting $4,000 for 6 months. So it's a big difference. But what you're getting, be sure, and it's not about spending the money, it's about getting the experience you need to move on.
Yeah.
And you never, and these camps that are run by people like I'm talking about here, and Tom Pritchard or Lance Storm, go to them, make it worth, learn and continue to learn. You never get too good in this business. And this Samoa Joe said to some guy, and when you think you know it all, go get a job at Kmart because you're done in our business. Because you never know it. I mean, it changes constantly. So, but listen, we can do this again sometime. You going to Waterloo this year, George?
Yes, sir, I'll be there.
My intent is to drive down. I can't say I'm there for all 3 days or 4 days though.
Well, it's okay.
I'm working on it.
All right. You could buy me a beer, couldn't you? What happened to the cyber WFIA reunion before we get out of here?
Well, that the fans, we thought we were going to get a big push, but it ended up not.
That's a shame.
Going as we wanted it. So they're planning. We're in the very early stages of planning a convention for next year.
I was teasing Darla Skaggs and her crew, right? I said, "Oh yeah, what the hell do I get? You get the same billing as I get? What's that?"
Yeah.
And then when I saw it was canceled, I said, "Okay, you guys canceled it. It's not on me."
Yeah, blame it on Darla.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I've enjoyed it. I really have.
I love you, man.
And stay in touch. And if you want to, you got another hour and a half you want to kill, listen to me babble on, do it.
Definitely. And we'll put all that information about the Waterloo, the camp and everything in our description when this comes out. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, Les Thatcher, thank you so much, sir, for coming on and your insight on everything. We really appreciate it.
Guys, it's my pleasure. Love you, George. God bless you, Brian. You guys take care. Look forward to seeing you in Waterloo, okay?
All right. And George, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Take care, guys.
All right, take care. We'll see you. All right. And folks, if you're watching, thank you. If you're listening, thank you. And please subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.